Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another play review. And today's play review is none other than Avenue Q. Pre-warning before we get into this video, if you haven't gone to see the play, this is your warning right now to click off the video in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right, now that that's been out the way, let's get into the story, the plot itself, and the production. The story follows a young boy who's just come out of college. He's looking for somewhere to rent, and other neighbourhoods are a little bit out of his price range. Now, he's not exactly worse off, but he definitely wants to live somewhere where he feels like he has a purpose. When he arrives in the neighbourhood, he finds himself introduced to a fictional version of Gary Coleman. Now, before I continue, let me just explain who Gary Coleman is. Gary Coleman was a child actor from back, I want to say, in the 80s. Right, I've just done a bit of search, just to make sure I'm correct on this, about the 70s, 80s, and 90s. He was very popular, and he's best known for his character as Arnold in the show Different Strokes. Now, they reference Different Strokes in this story by pretty much making a joke about the fact of, what are you talking about, Willis? He's also introduced to someone called Kate Monster, a person called Trekkie Monster. Right, I've got the book here. So there's Kate Monster, there's Lucy the Slut, there's Mrs. T, there's Bad Idea Bears, there is Nicky, there's Trekkie Monster, there is Preston, Rod, and Brian, Christmas Eve, and a bunch of ensemble characters, and Gary. And all of these form a collective. Now, our protagonist finds himself falling in love with Kate Monster, but their relationship is a very back and forth throughout the whole course of the play. At first, he comes into the neighbourhood with a bright, ambitious kind of open-mindedness. The pair then begin to discuss about the fact of everyone being stereotypical, a little bit racist, and most importantly, everyone having views that begin to vary every now and then. But they also point out in the play throughout the whole story about how it doesn't matter who you are. The most important thing is that you admit when you're wrong. There's also some brilliant songs in this story, such as The Internet Was Made for Porn, If You Was Gay, and Purpose. Now, purpose is a very key one to this whole story as a whole, because our protagonist keeps trying to search for a purpose. Now, the one thing that's a bit of an irony is the fact that he moves into this neighbourhood and assumes that he will immediately have a job. The whole play begins to talk about unemployment and how nothing is guaranteed. They also take the mick out of the idea of AI taking over people's jobs by saying that essentially an AI has called him up because a business was too scared to do it themselves. Now, the pair become very raunchy throughout the whole play, and essentially Kate Monster and our protagonist's whole relationship is tested when he points out that he's more interested in his purpose than actually what he has already. The pair end up splitting up, and then he ends up chasing after Lucy the Slut, and the pair end up in this kind of inner turmoil. Kate tries to get back with him, but Lucy decides to hide the note. And then, ironically, while she's up on the Empire State Building, she chucks a coin away that he had given to her, and it ironically hits Lucy and puts her in hospital. Now, the interesting sidestep to this whole story is Nicky. Nicky finds himself in a situation where he becomes self-reliant and, most importantly, goes from rag to riches. His roommate basically kicks him out for outing him as gay, and the pair end up in this kind of inner turmoil situation. The pair manage to resolve their differences by the end of the story. However, they are in this kind of inner space of whether or not they can trust one another. Now, I've got to say that I think one of my favourite characters throughout this whole play has got to be the Bad Idea Bears. Why? They're funny, they are witty, and most importantly, they are a great way to bring this idea of people doing bad things to the puppet world. Mrs. T. Mrs. T is a somewhat one of those characters you either like or you hate. I feel like I'm a bit indifferent with Mrs. T. She's not really in the play much. She's essentially kind of this background story about Kate Monster being a teacher. Now, Rod is the one who was outed as gay, and Preston is the one who's in love with Kate Monster, and essentially both of them find themselves in a situation in which their love lives are tested. Another character I'm a little bit indifferent about is Lucy the Slut, because I understand what they've done, and I appreciate what they are doing is essentially getting people from all different backgrounds and all different sort of lifestyles in this play. However, Lucy feels like, I don't know, just personally, in my own personal opinion, I feel like she's an interesting character, but she kind of feels once again a bit like Mrs. T, a background character that we're shown, but we don't really care too much about. Not necessarily because we don't care, more to the point because we're in this situation of we're so distracted by the love lives of our protagonists that Lucy feels like she should have her own story in general. Now, one character I definitely do pick up is their adaptation of Gary Coleman. Not only the jokes about different strokes, but the way that Gary Coleman's character has lived on Avenue Q for so long that essentially they're in this position where they're more out for themselves. I also like the idea that Gary Coleman's character, when the monster school is eventually introduced, kind of jokingly gives themselves their own position of power. So now that that's out the way, let's get into the idea of the set, the lighting, the design, and everything like that. As someone who learned a lot about lighting in college and has a lot of mates who still work in the production industry, I've got to say, I love the simplicity of this set. And the other thing I really like is how it reminds you of growing up and watching things like Sesame Street, like the Muppets. The way that they have produced this play is absolutely incredible. I also feel like their use of stage lighting and just the way that the light comes across the stage, like saying out of the circus, really keeps you hooked throughout the play. I also like the addition of them using screens in the background to be a little bit like Sesame Street. A little bit like the idea of when you watch Sesame Street and they start teaching kids about numbers. I like that they've really got in that kind of child animation style. However, the irony of this is the fact that I would say that this is a tap for tit sort of play, whether or not you consider it for children. It definitely has a lot of adult themes, and it definitely breaks a lot of those kind of boundaries of where puppets are just a part of this child-centric world. No, this this play makes an important kind of analysis of making sure that you remember that Avenue Q is set in a more mature world. You're set in this place where these puppets are basically the same as everyone else. They're no longer in their early teens or like childhood days anymore. They are fully grown adults and they are experiencing everything else that adults do. In a funny way, this kind of reminds me of a film known as Happy Time Murders. Now, for anyone out there who hasn't watched Happy Time Murders, essentially it's a puppet film that becomes really brutal on the idea of what puppets experience in the real world and how discrimination becomes a very big part of that. This is personified in this play by the idea that Kate Monster is basically always referred to as a monster rather than as a person, especially after Mrs. T, before firing her, basically says a bunch of stereotypical crap about the way that Kate and her kind are, to which rightfully she calls her a cunt. So, Avenue Q, what would I give it out of 10? It's a solid story with a solid backing stuff. The ensembles themselves are brilliant. The transition between scene to scene is flawless. and for that reason I give Avenue Q a solid 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next play review. Until then, goodbye, stay beautiful, you beautiful people.